Thank you so much, Mihai. So Mihai is also the president-elect of JCI New York City. Thank you so much for this wonderful session with Dr. Bush. And of course, I'm ready to go buy my book, but I'm going to see how my serendipity works. Maybe I might be the one winning the book today. So we're waiting for the draw. Thank you so much. And of course, our next session is going to be with Michael Simmons. He is going to speak about the master of mental models and learning. And this session will be moderated by our local chapter president, Christian. So we look forward to another fruitful session. So stay tuned for the next session. Thank you.
In 3 minutes. I'll invite our guest, Michael Simmons, to start his video as well. Hello, Michael.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we do. So we have, it's my honor to present to you Michael Simmons. He is an award-winning social entrepreneur. He's a best-selling author and a contributor to publications like Forbes, Fortune, Inc., Entrepreneur, Business Insider, and Harvard Business Review. He is also the founder of Mental Model Club, and he has multiple extremely popular Facebook groups that he runs. I know his work from a few years ago. I didn't really realize how important he is in this space, virtual space, until I started coming again and again and again and again, seeing his viral articles. So I'm actually very honored and very happy that Michael joined us. And I'd like to say that this session that will last around 50 minutes will be mostly a conversation between us, including me and you, the public, and Michael. So please prepare your questions to Michael and write them in the chat. And then we'll ask you one by one to ask your own question. But first of all, to start us, I'll start the conversation. So Michael, let's start with your story. How did you develop this interest in learning and in mental models?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, well, I just want to make sure my volume is good.
Yes.
It's good. All right, awesome. So it comes back to high school, actually. I was 16 years old. I probably read 2 books on my own ever outside of school. And my friend and I, Cal Newport, we had the idea to start a web development business. This was 1998. And it was during the height of the dot-com boom. So there was all these stories about young people being successful. And it just happened to be in a time period where you could look at a high school kid and just assume that they were expert at computers. And so we built a website. And I remember we got our first client and for $1,000, which is a fortune to a 16-year-old. And he's used to getting maybe a very small allowance. And we got $500 up front. And I basically at that point had almost no web development experience or business experience. Either of us did. And so we spent that $500 and bought $500 worth of books. And it was just very clear that, okay, there's these things that people who've already done this, they're going to share exactly how to do this. It just kind of was obvious. And that button clicked. And so I recently looked through, or that switch flipped in my head where I'm just like, okay, learning is really powerful. For anything that I want in any area of my life, there's someone who's done it. And so I just started reading a lot in high school. I looked at my Amazon receipt from like my junior year the other day. And there was one month I spent like $700 on books. And it was books on everything from dancing to like gardening to philosophy to that. And so I've basically just I'm 38, I'm actually going to turn 39 tomorrow. And I've just kept at it over the years. And the beauty is that you can really, really see it compound over time, where the nature, number one, your rate of learning increases over time. Thank you, Mihei, for the emoji there. I like that. And the rate of learning compounds. And then you start to really notice over time that I feel like you're able to make decisions and see things and see opportunities that it's just harder for people who haven't learned and haven't had as much knowledge in different areas to see those things. So actually now seeing all the benefits even more, I try to devote 3 to 4 hours per day just to learning because I see the value in it.
Wow, I'm impressed. So you are friends with Cal Newport. I actually know his book because I've read his books when I started my journey in college. He has some amazing books on how to become an A student and how to nail the college. So he is also famous. And I think he also has a book on habits. So we are also right now in the habits business because we started the Better Kind project, which is actually transform the habits.
That.
Yes, and actually I'm a little bit curious because there are 2 great minds, I mean, Carl and you, and I was curious, could it be, how much is it about you individual, like the fact that you started this desire for learning because you have it in yourself, and how much is about the community and the friends? For instance, the fact that you were a friend with Carl, who is also a writer and who also is interested in learning.
I think we had a really huge impact on each other and still do. And, in high school, at that time, we weren't writers or interested in these things. We were just like, and we had dual lives. Like one point, just like typical high school students. And the other point, we were like changing in the bathroom into a suit and then going to a business meeting and, having his dad drive us to a meeting or something like that. And so that juxtaposition of just seeing the adult life, a glimpse at that at a young age, I think also just a lot of conversations about how a world works. And I think that experience gave us a big imprint for the rest of our life. And throughout my whole career, I've been very intentional about building relationships. And so at a young age, I didn't feel like there were a lot of young entrepreneurs that I knew of. You know, in our high school, there was no one else that started a business. So I started organizing retreats where I'd randomly email other entrepreneurs and to say, hey, we're going to be going to somewhere in the world or to renting an Airbnb. Do you want to join us? And so I built a lot of relationships through that. I've probably done 20 or 30 of those weekend type retreats back in the pre-COVID days.
Wow, you have this entrepreneurial spirit and social spirit in you. And right now, going back to mental models, because the topic of today is actually mental models. What is a mental model, and why these mental models are useful?
Yeah, well, to answer that question, let me just tell a story for my past. You know, for me, a big turning point in my learning journey was around 2010. I've been reading for 10, 12 years a lot, and I was reading biographies and self-development books and other books, and I feel like I was reaching a plateau. And I was reading an interview or listening to an interview with Peter Thiel, and he was asking the question, what's the number one thing that you know that no one else knows? And at that point, I realized that so much of my learning, when I asked myself that question, I was just reading the latest bestseller or the latest book that was big, an idea, but almost all of my ideas were based on just conventional wisdom. And I felt like, wow, they're not that interesting. And so that's when I really started having a different approach to learning. And so I started, rather than just looking for useful books, I looked for rare and useful knowledge. And I realized that part of what makes knowledge valuable is not just that it's useful, it's that not a lot of other people know it. And that's also helpful for writing. And so as soon as I started applying that just had a huge impact on my life. The writing did much better. And in part of doing that, around 2014, I came across this book, Poor Charlie's Almanac. Still have it right here. It's a very thick book and is written by this investor, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, Charlie Munger. And he introduced me to this idea of mental models in this book. And it's a way of learning, it's a way of decision making that allows you to make just much better decisions. And so one way of thinking about it, a mental model, is that we're in life, we're always modeling the world. So if I close my eyes right now, or you to close my eyes, I would have a picture of this room in my head, and I could even just in my head walk around my house in my head. And I have a model of you, Christian, based on the emails we have. And I didn't consciously create that, but it's just now in my head. And so we're unconsciously doing this in our life. And the idea with the Mental Model Club and just mental models in general is you're becoming conscious of it, and you're finding holes in models that you have, that maybe of other people or of ideas, and you're looking for the most valuable models out there that could help you think better and make better decisions.
So as we are getting into these mental models, and I'd like to give it a little bit of concreteness so we'll understand. So my next questions will be about actually concrete mental models. Could you give us an example of a mental model, an extremely simple mental model, that if we'll learn it right now, we can learn it right now from what you say, and it will change kind of, I don't know, our life, our perspective on things, will bring the most value if we'll start applying it, if we'll know it and start applying. One mental model, simple, the simplest, with the most effect.
One simple one is a positive feedback loop. And so an example of a positive feedback loop would be compound interest with money. You put money in the bank, and then you're earning interest, and then that interest builds on top of itself. And it's very, very simple mental model, but it's also how most of the wealth was created in the world, is that in that way. And most of the people think about it in terms of just money and compound interest. But if you just take it and abstract it as a positive feedback loop, then you could really see it in terms of learning, that if you're building and learning durable knowledge that lasts and foundational knowledge, then you can build knowledge on top of each other. So for example, I think about it, let's just say you're learning math. First, you learn that there's shapes. There's these things called shapes. And then you realize, okay, some shapes seem to be really important, that there's these things called numbers. And then you realize that there's single digit numbers, double digit, triple digit. And then you realize that there's operators where you could add or subtract these numbers from each other. And then from there, you realize that there's multiplication, division, and it goes on, that it builds on top of itself. And so a lot of knowledge is in this way, that you're almost building like a pyramid of knowledge, and if you just learn more over time, it compounds. So one way I think about positive feedback loops, as well as in relationships, of just building deeper relationships and long-lasting relationships with people, that can also compound.
Oh, this is a powerful model, compounding and positive feedback loops. Indeed. Let's go to explore a little bit other examples of mental models. So for instance, if you take the entire set of mental models from the simplest to the most complex, if you choose one mental model, if you learn that mental model, be it simple, medium, or complex, and that, if you learn it, will have the largest effect on our life. Which one would you choose?
Yeah, well, first, to go back on the positive feedback loops one, it's just so simple, but most people don't do it. So a lot of times the feedback we get from certain things, like let's say we have a piece of candy, it tastes really, really good right away. You get about 40 seconds of things tasting good. And then maybe you get a sugar high that feels good. And then there's a negative that comes and you get a sugar drop. But over time, it's unhealthy in the body. And there's that dynamic across a lot of different areas. There's a little bit of pain up front. And then the benefit is compounding. And so I think a very simple mental model is looking for areas in your life where maybe there's a little bit of pain up front, but then years of benefit compounding on each other, and be willing to just make those investments and take that pain up front. This would be more healthier, have better long-term relationships, be wealthier, have more knowledge, be happier. And then I think the second one would be the 80-20 rule. And that when there's a positive feedback loop, let's just say in writing, what can happen is that a few pieces of content can account for a large percentage of all the attention online. And so when you look at all of the articles online, all the videos, it's not in the shape of a bell curve where the best article is just a little bit better than the least performing article. Rather, there's some people who've written articles or videos with literally billions of views, hundreds of millions of views. And then the most articles maybe have the median article online has 4 shares or so. And so when I saw that with writing and the positive feedback loop there, I saw that, and it took it on faith that if I focus on quality and trying to do the best thing that's ever been written on a topic, that there's all these positive feedback loops that kick in, that there's the social media will feature it more, which will cause it to be seen more. And then there's aggregators and other websites that all their only job is to find high quality content and feature it in their daily newsletter or other places. And so I was willing to, for example, when I started writing for Forbes, rather than spending maybe a few hours on an article, I would spend 60 hours on an article and really try to make it the best. And right away that started working. And that's an example of the 80-20 rule, that in a lot of domains, 20% of the inputs can create 80% of the results.
Wow, this is amazing. And it actually gives me another idea. You're basically saying, like, be the best or be average. And first of all, and the second thing, that the difference between the best and the average is not so big. It's rather small. But in order to get from this average to the best, you need to invest a lot of time and effort.
Well, I would actually say the difference between the best and the average actually is huge now in the online world. And so we're used to, let's say, a bell curve world, or let's say height. I'm pretty tall, I'm 6'5", but you're never going to find someone on a call who's 1,000 feet tall. And but in the online world, in a digital world, there's, with the positive feedback loops, you would find these huge differences in performance. And so what happens is the best content can capture more and more attention. And then if the average piece of content is actually capturing less and less attention. And so the implication I take away from it is just the returns on being the best in a category are increasing. And so it's worth really having a strategy for that.
Wow. I wanted to kind of oppose this mental model to another one by Gary Vee. I'm also a fan of Gary Vee. And he says the following: the secret of success is speed and volume and the quality. But the quality is not so important, because we cannot make sure that the quality will be there. So I need to produce content as fast as possible and do things as fast as possible and as much as possible. So how does these two mental models, I mean, I think both are successful because Gary Vee is successful as well, can coexist?
Yeah, that's a great example. Well, a lot of models that seem very opposite on one hand, they actually build off of each other. So I feel like this is an example of that. So one of the best ways to get to quality over time is doing a lot of experimentation and quantity. And then, so for example, in the startup world, the idea is you want to have your minimum viable product, and you're doing lots of tests. And the minimum viable product, you almost want it to be embarrassed by it. You don't want to have spend a huge amount of time making something, put a lot of money into it, and it doesn't work. But once you find that thing that works, then you want to really invest in making it great. And so in the academic world, there's this idea of the equal odds rule, or blind variation and selective attention. And it's basically saying that a lot of in the academic world, the top academic people often have the highest volume of academic studies as well. And then they take those studies and the ones that work and then build on top of those.
So it's not only about hard work, it's about hard work on something that works.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'd like to remind again our participants that if you want, you can come with your own questions. First of all, write them in the chat, and then I'll give you the opportunity to ask these questions with your voice. So please think about your question, write them in your chat, and you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions directly to Michael. And I actually have another question.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit curious about mental models and which mental models are useful or not, because in school, actually, one can argue that we learn mental models. We learn mental models in math, we learn mental models in physics, sciences, literature, history. So actually, the entire school period of time and the entire university period of time was some periods when we learn mental models. I mean, the question is, sometimes it's better not to, and some people will argue that all these mental models are not really useful to them. So my question is actually, how do you distinguish all these mental models, which are useful and which are not useful? First of all. And second of all, it seems that not all mental models are useful.
Yeah, really good questions. So let's see. take it. Well, when I was starting to write for Forbes, I was writing on the topic of relationship building, and there's so many articles on relationship building. It's hard to jump in and have a unique perspective. And one of the things I did is jump into the world of network science. And there's a subfield within network science called social network science. And that all they do is study how networks form and how, and I realize I'm not quite answering the question. So let me take a step back. Can you ask the question again?
So throughout the school period of time, we learn a lot of mental models. And people will argue that all those mental models actually not so useful because we don't really use in our daily life physics. We may use sometimes math, and we don't use in daily life all this historical data about civic war or Roman Empire. So it brings a kind of skepticism towards mental models because we learn mental models. Are mental models always useful? This is the first question. And the second question, how we differentiate between useful and not useful mental models.
Okay. I can answer it more directly this way. One way of looking at knowledge is as a tree. So the tree has leaves, and then there's twigs that come to the leaves, and then there's branches, and then there's a trunk. And that is the nature of it, that if you're learning something at a deeper level, closer to the deep trunk, then learning that can apply in a lot of different areas. And so that's one of the qualities I found are the most useful in mental models, is you're understanding a principle, let's say positive feedback loops, and then you're able to apply it across a lot of different areas. So if you apply positive feedback loops to money, it's compound interest. If you apply it to, let's say, animals and a herd, you could say it's a stampede. And if you apply it to relationship building, okay, there's not a word for that yet, but there's the compounding and relationships, compounding and learning. And so once you learn once you view knowledge as a tree and you focus on learning these fundamental ideas, not only can you apply that idea in your field and look for the positive feedback loops or the feedback loops in general, but you can get insight to almost every field, because every field has positive feedback loops. And so when you have, now you imagine having 10 or 20 of these fundamental models, then right away you can go to a field that you've never been in before. And right away you can intuitively understand, I mean, I guess English, I'm trying to think of a more simple example. It's like, if you understand how to do an alphabet and how to read, now you can go into every field and there's books there that you can now understand and read. And so you can almost think about mental models as this cross-discipline alphabet that right away you can understand things. And the big challenge is just when a mental model is applied to a specific area, like a stampede, you know, it's no longer called a positive feedback loop, it's called a stampede. And so when it's applied to interest, it's no longer called a positive feedback loop, it's just called compound interest. And so that can obscure the underlying mental model because every field has its own name for words. And the negative of just learning things at the surface level and just at the words that field uses is it's harder for you to transfer it across other fields because you don't realize that it's connected to a deeper principle. And I'll just give an example for myself. So when I was starting to write in 2013, I had the challenge that I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have a big list. And so I want to write online in an environment where I knew there's this idea of content shock, that there's more and more content every day and the amount of tension is remaining the same. So how can I break through that? And the mental models is how I was able to break through. So number one, I read this book called Blockbusters by Anita L. Burse. She's a Harvard professor, and she's basically studied that across all these fields of media, like books, music, TV, that the most successful strategy was a blockbuster strategy that, you know, if you look at the top movies like Avengers, just one movie or a Disney movie could account for a huge percentage of all of their profit and revenue for a year. And the same is true for music, books, and TV. And then I saw when it's applied to articles, people weren't using the blockbuster idea. They were just putting out something that was good enough and not really trying to find the best ideas and then build on top of them. And so that's an example of where just understanding that mental model of the 80-20 rule and positive feedback loops, I was able to give me confidence to really make big bets in articles. And if I make a really good article, I could stand out. And then, I'll stop there, but that's an example.
Okay, that's interesting. I just want to make a connection between what you said about the blockbuster book. Actually, I did not read the book, but I've been to his presentation. There is a book by Albert Laszlo Barabasi. It's called The Formula. He's a known scientist in this complexity field. And he basically analyzed how can a scientist become successful. So to publish an article that will be highly cited, because in the scientific field, they care a lot about the citation, number of citation they index. And actually, what he discovered is that you need to publish as many articles as possible, because more articles you produce, suddenly you can have this blockbuster article that will suddenly take off and give you worldwide fame and increase your rating. So yes, this is another book on the similar topic. Similar to the blockbuster.
Yeah, it's a great book, and I'd actually really recommend it for everyone. I did a virtual event, and he was a guest there twice earlier in the year. And I really respect his work, and it's actually really fascinating work of their formula. They did all these studies of all of the academic research throughout time. There's been millions of studies, and it's just structured in a database where you could see how many people got citations. And one of the findings was there's this finding of a lot of researchers, they have their biggest studies and their most famous groundbreaking ideas in their late 20s or in their 30s. And so if you just see that alone, you're just like, okay, I guess if you're getting older in your late 30s or 40s or 50s, that you're not going to have as big ideas. But when they actually dug deep, what they found is their hit rate stayed the same throughout their career. And the reason that people in their 20s and 30s were more successful was because they actually just published a lot more. And so they are much more productive. And so that's where they really narrowed down on this productivity and just getting out as many ideas. So how I apply that today in my own writing, as an example of just applying a mental model, is every day through myself or the team, we publish probably 30 pieces of content in different ways. So just a huge number. Christian, you know about, we have 7 different Facebook groups. So based on this sort of thinking, we just wanted to test a lot of ideas. So actually, can I show you, can I share my screen with you guys? This might be more.
Yes, please.
Sometimes mental models can be a little bit, let me see here. Facebook group growth. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
So basically what I was seeing as a writer in this world is that it's often really surprising the ideas that take off, that it's unexpected. So for me, one of my most popular articles is the 5-hour rule. And over millions of people have read articles that I've directly written. And then other people have written articles on the 5-hour rule, and that has been seen over 10 million times. So this huge breakout, and I'm now writing a book on that idea. That idea, originally I was writing a book proposal, and it was a smaller idea. And within the proposal, everybody I showed the proposal to did not like the book idea, but they all went to this idea of the 5-hour rule and said, what is that? That sounds interesting. So that was an example of a feedback loop from people, because I'm just assuming that I don't fully know what resonates. And then based off of that, I wrote an article and that blew up. And so my basic point there is I'm constantly surprised by what resonates. And so in this group, we created a quotes group as an experiment, where one of the parts of our articles that gets shared often are quotes within the article. And so every day, someone on our team posts 2 articles, or 2 quotes. So basically you can just see, really simple. We started the group in February. So this is it here. This is the new members with only 171 people. And all we've been doing is posting 2 quotes per day. And so now it's up around 30,000, growing pretty quickly. And then basically we take the most winning quotes and then build, either include them in articles or actually create visuals. So I get more confident that if a quote did really well in this group, we can use it somewhere else. And so that's where on LinkedIn, the person on our team takes one of the top performing quotes or visuals and then puts them on LinkedIn. And then as an example, let's see, it's slow. Whoop. This is the 2 examples. So this took me about, let's say, half an hour to do. But this quote was one of the best performing quotes in our group. And that gave me confidence to put more time into it and to create a visual for it. And so this is an example of visual that did well. We just spent an hour yesterday. This is still learning the visual skills, but this is taking a quote. The intelligent man is one who has successfully fulfilled many accomplishments and yet is willing to learn more. And so willingness to learn, accomplishments, and then intelligence. And this is an example of a few different things. Number one, it's just feedback loops. So so number one, it's kind of going back to this idea of productivity, that you can't really predict your best, a musician can't always predict their best work beforehand. You just ultimately don't know. And there's often surprise. So that's one reason why I'm adding a lot of quantity to it. And then if there's one that performs well, then I'm putting extra time to make it into higher quality. So that's just an example with quotes, but I also do that with, we have an image one group. Of taking images from other places and crediting the authors of across the internet and noticing which ones perform the best. And then based on that, building on top of that. So it's a very different way of creating articles that's a result of using mental models versus just going to reading an article about how do I create better articles and whatever ones I come up with on Google, creating it. It's almost starting from a ground up perspective on how do you create ideas that are really high quality and that spread online.
Wow.
And it's worked really well for us, over and over. And then also works, every week there's 10,000 new people through all the different channels who subscribe basically to different channels.
Wow, this is fascinating. And we have a question from Crispin, and I'd like to ask Crispin to ask the question.
Thank you, Michael. If we're practicing the mentally modeling and look at the taking in the information, reasoning, experimenting, and getting the feedback, how long do you think that we should go about with experimenting in that experimental stage before considering alternatives? So as you gave an example earlier, you have the piece of candy, you take it in, you get the sugar rush, you start feeling that drop. How long should we try before deciding another piece of sugar or another piece of candy, or trying alternatives? And in that feedback part, should we make it proportional how big a decision we think it is for ourselves or our lives?
Yeah. Okay. It's a really interesting question. Well, one of the fundamental topics related to this is known as the explore exploit trade-off. Is, or another word for it is discover or develop. Is how much time should we put towards things that are more exploring? So if we have a job right now, how much time should we put towards learning a new skill outside of that area or exploring, versus just trying to do better and better at our job? And one thing I can very confidently say is that most people very overdo just focusing on becoming better at their current thing and optimizing, taking more of an optimizing approach versus exploring approach. And one way of thinking about it in math, there's something known as the greedy algorithm, that if you're always maximizing for short-term benefit, then you're going to end up in what's called a local optima. So you're going to get to a good result, but you're almost never going to get to the best result. And so the cost of just focusing on doing well with where you are is you might get into kind of a dead end where you plateau. And so I would say, number one, however much time you're spending towards exploring probably could be increased. And so for me, I personally, our big idea is the 5-hour rule, that in studying a lot of top performers across fields, at the minimum, they put 5 hours a week toward deliberate learning. And so, and I personally make the case that it should be 80-20 for a lot of knowledge workers. So 20% of your work time spent towards exploration. Actually, I wrote let me share here. Let's see, LinkedIn. Give me a second here. I'll give some links to it. So if you want more research on just explore, exploit, I have an article here to share. Let's see. And then let's see here. And then this one, so I pulled from Google. They've had for a long time, the 70-20-10 rule, that 70% of your time should be dedicated to core business tasks. 20% of your time should be dedicated to projects related to the core business, so more experimental. And then 10% of the time should be dedicated to projects unrelated to the core business. And even Gary Vee followed a similar thing of putting 20% of his time towards things that may or may not pay off and that are longer term oriented. The big thing that I've noticed is that if you're exploring or exploiting, they're fundamentally different feelings and maps. So if you're leveraging what you already know, you have a lot of experience, so you're more inside your comfort zone, and most of the time you're likely going to succeed. So for me as a writer, I've already have all these skills as a writer, and so most of the articles are going to do well. But when you're exploring, it's kind of the opposite. You're constantly outside of your comfort zone and uncomfortable. You're going to fail most of the time. The things may or may not pay off. And if they do, it might take months or years to pay off. And for most people, it's just hard to do that. So 20% is my personal number that I use.
And then just a follow-up is, do you think we're making more or less decisions during the year 2020 or 2019? As an example, should we try and do more, depending on the answer of your decision, should we try more or less with focus? Because as we turn back time to 2019, it may be we need to go back to making those quicker decisions, or do I take this train or that train? Do I take this road or that road? What can we learn? Are we losing out on something because we're out of practice on decision making? So sort of your opinion on where we are in decision making, quantity and I guess quality of just choices.
And can you ask that a different way? Because I want to make sure I answer it right. Or when you ask about decision quantity and quality, at a deeper level, what are you asking there?
Well, a lot of time we're having to make decisions for interactions with others on whether we should be commenting, not commenting in when we were more working in person, more interacting in public settings. Whereas now, as we've gone more home-based, we have less of those external decisions to be making, interactions. How is that going to be affecting us when we're returning back into more of a public life?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it directly, but I think what you're asking, I'm going to try to answer it. I feel like what I think you're asking. So me personally, using the mental model approach, once COVID started happening, what I did is there's a mental model called second order effects. Let's put that in there, second order effects. That for a lot of things, there's the first effect. So going back to the candy thing, there's the first thing that's the most obvious when something happens. And then there's second order, it's like a domino chain. And the second, third order effects are often surprising and hidden. So like, for example, when cars are developed, that leads to creating roads, which leads to a whole gas station industry, which leads to a whole insurance industry, and so on. And so right away, part of what I was trying to understand is what are going to be the second order effects. And so one thing I do a lot is create Google Docs. I use writing just to understand it. So I created this document. Coronavirus, COVID, second order. Apologize here. Coronavirus. Okay, this is it. So just thinking about, keep in mind, this is created in March and hasn't really been updated since then, but it was just trying to think about each area of life and then actually crowdsource this. So tens of thousands of people, it actually went viral on its own and tens of thousands of people were involved. So this is just family, just all the different things. How it affect dating, home, exercise equipment. Just bought a sauna and what do you call it? Treadmill on our end. So it's like, okay, exercise equipment going up and so on. So this was the first thing I used personally to just try to understand what's happening, what's really happening at a deeper level and what's the impact going to be. And then after a lot of time doing this and working on this document, there's a lot of different things. I was like, okay, are there any core mental models here that we should use to really get a better understanding? And so the one that I personally came up with that's been the most helpful for me is that really what's happening at the most, so from a second order level at the deepest level, is that this trend of digitization of all things going online has been happening for decades. You know, movies going online, books going online, and now we're just kind of going to the future, and we're going to 10 years into our future. What does that look like? So suddenly restaurants are ordering online and delivering, and so we're seeing that. And so then, what does that mean? So what does it mean when we're working from home and you can hire a programmer that's not just in, let's say, in your city, but you can hire a programmer on the whole other side of the world. What are the consequences of that? Let me see here. And so, one of the things that I feel like that happens is just when something moves online, it goes into more of a winner take most dynamic. So imagine an offline world before there was any music. If you were a performer, just a singer, the only way you could make money is by traveling close to you, traveling around and actually performing. And so you can imagine there's only so many singers per area that there could be. And so there's all these, rather than one main singer in the world, in other words, there's lots of smaller singers. And let's say we take teaching as an example. Now, if students are online and they could take any teacher in the world, theoretically, does it make sense for them to take the teacher that's in their local area teaching physics? Or does it make sense to take the best teacher in the world who's just really, really good at keeping attention and teaching that topic? And so it changes education. And so it allows me to then make predictions about, I think that there's going to be, the rise of celebrity teachers in a way, that the teachers who are at the very best, everyone's going to want to take their course. And so they're going to get more and more attention online. But I guess what I'm saying in answer to your question is the number one thing is just trying to have situational awareness of what's happening at a fundamental level, and then trying to find the underlying mental models that allow me to make predictions about what's going to happen, and then decisions fit within that. So that's partially what Chris and I were talking at the very beginning, and I was saying that the difference between great and average is a lot larger now, and that's just there's a lot of things I don't like about that. It creates incredible inequality, but it's also just the dynamic of how people make decisions. And so on an individual level, it makes sense to really keep learning and try to be the best in your discipline, because if you're average, then why would people choose you over the best? Was that answer your question indirectly?
Oh, this is absolutely amazing. And I actually have one more question. It will be the last one. And then we have a small thing at the end. So I'm actually surprised by your productivity. I am a member of many groups that you actually moderate, you started. I've read many of your articles, and I want to tie this to our other program that we have. JCI University started Better Kind Transformational Habits program, where people take small habits and try that could have the biggest impact on their life and implement it in order to change their lives to the better. And I want to ask you, what habit that you have that makes you so productive, immensely productive, from 5 a.m. in the morning till late at night?
Well, first, I just want to say, I think what you're doing with habits is hugely consequential and important, because I think habits are the bottleneck that most people have between the intention to want to be better at something and then the result that they're ultimately looking for. And the more that we have the Mental Model Club, but we also have a course where we teach people how to write blockbuster articles. And I'm seeing ultimately the fundamental thing that they need to master, people need to master, is publishing things consistently and putting in the time. And that's one of the hardest parts, because that's where all the resistances come up. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that you're doing, the importance of the habits. And that's really where the rubber hits the road. The learning is really important because it gets it in your mind, but if you don't apply it then, or use it in your life to make better decisions. And so for me, you may not be surprised by my answer, but by learning that because of the mental model that I have of where I think the world is going and compounding gains, I believe that learning is one of the best investments that most people can make. And I think even 1 hour per day is not a lot, and that even 3 to 4 hours is closer to actually optimal if you're looking at it from a 10-year, 20-year perspective. It's kind of like the example of Abraham Lincoln and chopping down the trees, where he said if he had, I don't know the exact number, if he had 6 hours to chop down a tree, he would spend 4 hours sharpening it. And so I think most people, they're kind of going through career using a saw that's not very sharp, where it just makes a lot of sense to really spend way more time learning than you would think and get your mind really sharp. And then you're able to make decisions that have a high leverage. So now I could write an article from the ideas and the things that I've learned, and it could reach literally millions of people or tens of millions of people. And so there's more leverage that's possible.
Wow.
So let me just say that in a different way, is that when things get digital, the potential leverage from your ideas gets larger. So if you have a really good idea, anybody can have a really good idea. Anybody can post it online. That's not the challenge. And if it does really well, it's going to be spread. The scale that it could spread is, your idea can beam across the world instantly. And so in a world where there's that sort of infinite leverage on your ideas, it could be a book, you could have a product, that really the key is having the right idea. And that's where I feel like learning, experimentation, and getting really good there is why it's so valuable and why I put so much time into it.
Amazing. Thank you. And actually, I have the last question based on what you said. If you can tell us in one sentence where the world is going, because you said that you are doing this based on your vision. In one sentence.
Well, okay. I mean, I think the obvious thing, it's hard to predict the future. But I think one obvious thing that's happened is the world is becoming more digital. And I don't think people actually are building that into their model of the future, number one. And then number two, that Moore's law. So Moore's law is what allowed us to go from these huge computers that filled up the room. I remember my mom took me she used to work in the Navy as a programmer, and she took me to this room of supercomputers when I was young, and it just looked like washing machines. And now we have this device, and according to the laws of physics, something like we could still shrink things by something like 1 trillion. Okay, I know it's a big difference, trillion or a billion. I have the same exact number somewhere, but we still have a long, long way to go on Moore's law. And if you just follow all the changes that have happened in the past 40 years with Moore's law, and just think about what's going forward with it, and just assume that we'll be close to Moore's law, the amount of change and how things are going digital, we need very different mental models and ways of thinking.
Great. Amazing. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. And you said that tomorrow is your birthday, yes?
Yes, turning 39.
So, yes, I would like our participants to unmute their microphones.
Yay!
And Vrishini will lead the way.
Yes,
Oh
so 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to
Michael. Yes.
Happy
birthday
to you.
Happy birthday
to Michael. Happy birthday to
you.
Michael.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that.
These are birthday wishes for you from all corners of the world. There's Mauritius, Honduras, Moldova, all countries in here. So we wish you all the very best. We wish you lots of happiness, lots of success, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to speak to all of you today. Hope this was useful, and just thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, President Christian, for this wonderful session. It was so interesting. Thank you so much for getting us such wonderful speakers. And of course, we have much, much more coming up today. So before that, we are going to have a business networking event, which is lining up, which will start in a couple of minutes, going to be led by our president-elect of JCI New York City chapter. So we are going to start in a few minutes. So I look forward to having you all in that session.
Thank you, Rushini. Don't lose the opportunity. Right. It's the first time we are doing it online. And I know it's in the same time as the launch, but please do an intermittent fasting for 1 day and join the networking event. The next session will start at 1 p.m. sharp, so we should be ready like in 2 minutes starting the business networking events. So see you soon.